was a brilliant panel. One thing that we are absolutely guarantee at Rishihood, students will leave with a great professional degree, but they'll also leave with a job. And I know which actually they prefer. Yeah? So you guys are terribly important to us, and I hope you will stay with us through our long and august career. Okay, let me invite the panel. Who are you? So Dr. Aditya Dave Sood. Oh, there he is. You were down there just now. Aditya is, I won't say much about it, I won't say much about it. He's the founder and CEO of the Center for Knowledge, blah, blah. That's the kind of thing we got. He also has a double doctorate, one of which is in Sanskrit. Quite a bright guy, actually. Let me invite Deepti Sawhney, who runs an amazing organization that I can never pronounce the name of. It's one of those, that's what I said. Okay. Deepti, I've known Deepti since she headed up the IT department at the British school, and she taught my girls. And she taught them very well indeed. Let me know, who am I going to get? Manika Walia, who I've worked with very enjoyably for the last 5, 6, 7 years, and who is an excellent educationalist, and she's the associate dean at my old school, the Sushant School of Design. Pervin Malhotra. I can never get this with Pervin. People talk about Pervin being a career counsellor. I tell you, she's an awful lot more than that. I've never met anybody so committed to young people and their careers. She also has a following on her in our various ways that she communicates with people of over 50 million people. It's pretty good. That's a lot of emails every night. And last but certainly not least, gosh, what am I doing? Professor Lalit Das. So for those of us who've been in the industry for a while, Lalit is, he's an icon. He is absolutely an icon. Okay. So we've heard that there's some problems. We've heard that there's some problems in design education. We've heard that there's some needs. We've also heard that there's an awful lot of vision and there's an awful lot of optimism. But let me just ask you as a generally, and we'll start at the end there with Pervin. How important with, like, for instance, all the students that you counsel, etc., on various subjects, how important do you think that design education is in their minds, in the minds of their parents, or even in the minds of government?
Not terribly important, I'm afraid, at the moment, except for a few dilettante, kids, especially from well-to-do families, girls in particular, who look at careers in design, but everybody else thinks that's not the safe thing to be doing. And particularly when a student is bright, academically bright, then everybody tells them that, hey, it's safer to be pursuing academic careers, and then maybe look at design as something on the side or as a hobby. So invariably, the kind of kids who come to me, and all kinds do, a lot of them who are looking at design are those who are not good academically. So they're looking at it as a softer option, which is not the right thing to be doing. But on the other hand, I think, proudly and single-handedly directed so many academically bright students towards design, something that they'd never even dreamt of. And more than them, kids are open, but more than them, it's the parents. And I think in today's day and age, you need to, it's the parents who need more counseling than the students, really. Because they have such fixed ideas about the careers that they are in and the careers that their colleagues are in, that thinking out of the box is something that's, makes them feel uncomfortable. But I think it's fantastic, and in the years to come, design is going to be such a big field We talk about 70% careers in this world being replaced by artificial intelligence and such like. And 60% of the new careers that are going to be coming in over the next decade, which have not been invented yet. Now, students and parents get very befuddled and they say, then what are we talking about? What is all this career counseling and guidance about? How do we plan our careers? So the careers that will sustain at least that's what experts say, are those careers where the human touch is required, number one, which cannot be replaced by a robot, and number two, creative careers. Creative careers because the creative process in itself is so complex that it cannot be easily replicated by a robot or a computer. So I think design is not just something, creativity is not just something that's required in design schools, it is also required, creativity is, if you want to survive, whether it's in management or in social causes or in engineering, creative thinking is something, design thinking and creative thinking is something that every student needs to be equipped with.
Excellent, thank you very much for that. Deepti, you have a huge network of schools around the country, schools at every level. Next week we're going to Mayo to run some workshops. What's happening within the schools? Your speciality is IT. What is happening within the schools at school level? Forget about tertiary level. What is happening at school level to encourage young people to use their creativity more?
Okay, so hello everybody. I'm Deepti Sahani, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey before I take that question, just a minute. I'm a fourth generation army officer's daughter and a wife. My husband's a brigadier. He's manning the boundary somewhere in China, and that's how we stay happy. He's there and I'm here. When you look at it as a kid, we've moved wherever my father was posted, and perseverance, creativity, just being was something. I didn't need a school or a college for that. What I'm trying to get is that we need the right kind of environment where we are to be able to do what we want to do. So I was an educator. I've taught English, I've taught science, I've taught maths, and my own journey has been from a classroom teacher. I took up educational technology because that was something which was, really getting into the mainstream. And then finally, I started doing things like design thinking and creativity, is because that's what I thought was required, and I needed to support the children with that. So if you really look at the NCF, the National Curriculum Framework, it's brilliantly written. It is superbly written. There is constructivism, there's creativity. The only fact is that it's not implemented well. Having said that, there are schools in pockets in India who are doing a brilliant job. So if you look at one of the Krishnamurti schools, so we had taken a set of 10 principals to one of these residential schools. In the prayer hall, there was this girl who was dancing, and there were some children sitting with her. So after the performance finished, we went to her and we said, what are you doing? So she said, I'm doing my Hindi assignment. So in her Hindi assignment, she did a poetry, she did a dance and a song, and the children sitting around her were actually peer evaluating. So there are schools who are actually thinking of creativity, they are thinking of innovation. It's just that the synergies are not there. And there is not a body who actually tells them, do this, and this is a nice thing to do. There are these people who are progressive, who are doing what they need to do. So having seen all these things somewhere in 2014 is what I started deliberating on, what can we do as a standalone entity to be able to support these schools and provide them a platform. So we started something which is known as the EdTech Summit series, and in that we have projects called Design Thinking for Social Change. So we get children to couple up and we get them to plan something regarding the challenge that they're facing in the community. They make projects, they make prototypes, they run the projects, do the iteration. So we are following the design cycle of Stanford School of Design. I didn't reinvent the wheel. I wanted to give them a framework. We actually conceptualized it to the Indian schools, and the children are doing a beautiful job. So, something like the Sitapur school in the Vidyagyan school in Sitapur, they actually got the barbers in the city to connect with the farmers because the hair was not disintegrating, and they thought, the children thought that it was a good idea to mix it with manure, and they're using it for leguminous plants. So if you give them that opportunity, the children will rise up and do things. I think what we need to do, the governments and the state governments and the central governments can say what they want, but I think people like us need to provide that platform.
But there's definitely a change, isn't there? I mean,
Yes.
when I've been at any of your projects, I mean,
Yes.
the excitement that comes up.
Yes.
So if I find myself talking to the director of Mayo College,
Right.
who's an ex-army man,
Yes.
who used to drive a tank, and he
Yes.
was a big guy as well, I don't know how he got into it, but he's talking to me about his recognition of how important that is to his school.
Absolutely.
And that's going on at every level, because
But
again,
it's still in pockets, Mike.
but it is moving.
Yes,
I'm
it is.
trying to be terribly enthusiastic.
Yes.
Just give me 1 second. I'm going to skip you, Lalit, for 1 second,
Yes.
because we're going from secondary education. Let's go into tertiary education, and let's talk to Manika. Now, you've had a lot of experience, Manika, in working in design schools. How do you think things are going at the moment? You see, I'm just wondering if the lack of interest amongst with parents and students in design education is the fault of the design schools. What do you think? What do you think on that?
Mike, basically, for the tertiary education, we have to think that, we are talking with a matured student. Our audience is a smart learner. So this smart learner is basically a person who does not requires information. He's born into this digital era. So what happens is that when I go to my class and I want to introduce a topic maybe, if I write a name of the topic on the whiteboard and one Google enter, the information is there right on the screen. So as a mentor, as a thing, what we really have to think about is that information is there, but then how a student actually understands that information, how the students actually applies that information in the real life situation. Are we giving him that real life experience? Are we giving him that kind of a space to the student where the student can actually think, he can think critically, and he can get into problem solving? So, we are, and maybe to an extent, to a great large extent, our hands are definitely tied. We come under this compliance body and, the learning outcomes. So there is definitely a need where we have to relook into the curriculum at the tertiary level. We have to define our learning outcomes for sure. We have to give them the space where they can start thinking. All these things have to be looked into.
Yeah, I think one of the big problems, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, that design education, especially at private design education at the tertiary level, has become a big business. And the minute it becomes a big business, then it loses its integrity. And I can tell you for now, for sure, that will not happen with us in Rishihood. But then, sort of, Lalit, just going back to you. So so you sit on the Senate. It's a Senate, isn't it? NID.
Yes.
You're a senator. Oh,
Yes,
wonderful. So there it is. So we're now looking at the premier school of design in the country. Yeah, the National Institute of Design. Been there for 60 years. Yeah, there's 2.5 NIDs at the moment. And as we've had this conversation, NID should have at least 100 NIDs after 60 years. What's been going on?
See, the problem essentially is that at one end we say that creativity is something innate. At the other end, we want to define a route, a map by which to cultivate creativity. This is where the problem is. What we need to do is create an environment where we develop teachers who have the courage to encourage creativity. This is what is lacking. It is lacking in our society, in our culture. We do not have the courage to encourage creativity, to accept creativity, to appreciate creativity. Sunita was talking of tolerance, acceptance. Go a step beyond. Appreciate diversity. This is what is required. And unless we can do that, we are not creating an environment where we can encourage creativity. Creativity is the starting point. In one of my earlier talks, I have articulated in detail intelligence, creativity, inventiveness, and innovation. And when does creativity becomes innovation? That's what we have to understand. So there's an underlying level of values that moderates thinking and cultivates, or let's say takes creativity towards innovation. This is what we have to understand. You see, creativity is enhancing the whole. Creativity is creating the whole. If you look at nature, every species, nature is so creative. Every species is a whole. It's a creative whole. But it still enhances the whole, which is the ecosystem. And that's what we have to understand.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, bringing it down to the holistic level. And if we go to another phase, and let's come on to Aditya. So Aditya, with the startups that you've done and the various things, projects that you've had, I remember when you were looking at trying to start up a postgraduate college at one stage, yeah? And then it was difficult to take that forward because of certain restraints. I mean, what is your take on what we're doing with creative education in this country?
Thanks. So I put some notes down on this coaster. It seems to me that there's an intersection between learning about the world, being empathetic or synthetic, or aggregating that kind of information about the world, and then building something new that hasn't existed, or something that hasn't existed in a particular way. This process, the design disciplines, architecture, which I studied, as well as the people, down the road, down the next corridor, there's a whole big IIT Kanpur event around startup masterclasses happening. They're also preoccupied with these questions. What is it that one needs to know about the world, and how is it that one should learn to think about the world, which will then empower one to make contributions or build new propositions and put them out there and see what the market says of them. This is what we're trying to do. But I'm sad to say that I feel they've got one end of the stick, we've got one end of the stick in this room. Anthropologists at JNU have another end of it. And it hasn't really come together to people's satisfaction. After I studied architecture, I studied anthropology at the University of Chicago. And I had to completely forget this earlier self of mine. It wasn't really stimulated or activated at all while I was a grad student in a social science department. And only much later on in professional life did I get a chance to sort of synthesize studying about people and then designing for them, which is what my company Vihara or CKS does. Of late, we've been getting opportunities to actually build apps and build ways of integrating technology into large-scale delivery systems, healthcare in particular. Entire state governments are then working with these apps with rollout schemes. And here, I've had the opportunity to work with technologists that haven't been trained in the disciplines that I've had access to. And there's a necessary kind of humility and acknowledgement that they can do things that I can't do, and vice versa. Is it really possible for us to expose our kids to the full run? I think maybe yes, in some way. And my kids attend the Kunskapsskolan school system in Gurgaon. They're doing some very promising things. They've had a sort of design thinking activity for kids in their primary section, 5th grade and below. The industrial paradigm that design still subtends from, design education and design discourse is attached to, this is specifically theorized by the Bauhaus. There have been, I think, attempts at a kind of update, occasional update, coming from the Royal College of Art or elsewhere, schools in New York and California. But I would say that a broad, maybe informational age or digital age or distributed and decentralized age that we're now in, that paradigm is elusive. And I would think at least one should begin with the kind of humility to accept that there are needs in our society and in our children that the models that we're working with are likely to be largely inadequate to solve for. There's a friend and mentor of mine named Esko Kilpi based in Helsinki, and I think, coming from a small country that isn't used to influencing the world much, there are things that they can say and do in some ways in a microcosm that can be helpful for us in other parts of the world where we have much larger kind of scale to work with. One of the things that he's been advocating for over a decade is the idea of earning and learning at the same time. That this bifurcation itself is problematic. There are certain kinds of pressures and realities, actualities that one confronts in practice, which cannot easily be simulated, much as we try. My maybe provocation to you guys is to think through maybe what are the ways in which the very structures of education, including the idea that people are this strange hybrid adult, non-adult kind of infantilized young adult between 18 and 23, especially in this country, who must be sequestered from the market, from, poverty and the exigencies of society in order to be, nurtured in some sort of campus. And so what does that perpetuate? And what kinds of understanding does that allow? And then what kinds of other learnings does that actually disable?
Thank you, that's great. And one thing I've always thought that, if suddenly somebody's working in Rajasthan, one of these energy companies, and they discover a big gas field or there's an oil field somewhere on the coast, and they're like, wow, there's enough energy there to sort of sustain us for decades, and then the stock market share just goes straight through the roof. We have within the underprivileged in this country, we have one of the biggest powerhouses of innovation on the planet. And we've all seen it. When you give these young people who've had to survive, they've had to survive. If they don't get it right, they don't live. When you give them the opportunity, and we're going to see that this afternoon in another panel, when you give them the opportunity to actually do something, it's massive. And that's again why when Professor Misra came to me and said, what do you think about this? I thought it was very exciting, because the fact that Rishihood is not looking at how deep your pockets are, it's looking at your merits, and I know that's a fact. It's not a catch line, but to engage, Pervin, to engage or generally, do you think that we should be? So our responsibility at Rishihood as a university should be to engage young people in school. We learned about the thing. 98%, 30%, 12%. Should we as a university be making an outreach to hit the kids when they've still got at least 30%, whatever?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, you've often talked about young children having so much more creativity, and then, you know, as they grow older and the system, the garbage keeps getting accumulated on top, it sort of stymies. I've seen my little grandson, you know, he's bright. Every single day when I ask him, when he comes back from one of the elite schools in Delhi, how was your day? He says, boring. He says, boring. And you know what he does? He is a compulsive cartwheeler. You know, he just cartwheels and cartwheels and cartwheels before dinner, after lunch, before breakfast, while getting ready. And he has invented so many different styles of cartwheeling, you know. But then in school, you have to keep quiet and sit. So the most interesting period for him is the athletics period, and that's it. The rest is, you know, he waits for his lunch break. So yes, I think, and somebody else in the previous panel also suggested that if Rishihood could reach out to schools and, you know, nurture that creativity, which our system just doesn't have the time to do or the space to do, I think that would be the starting point.
I think that's something we can seriously look at and enjoy. I mean, Deepti, when I've been on some of the events with you and seen the ideas that come from the young people, they are magic. And the wonderful thing is that at all levels of schools, they tend to be projects that benefit society, don't they? They tend to want to help people, which is super. But what kind of percentage of youngsters that we see in schools like that will actually now go on to a design education or an education in the creative industries? Or do they lose it?
I think there's a lot of parental pressure to say, you know, there are certain things, certain subjects that you're supposed to do. If you're a boy, you need to be an engineer or a doctor or finish your MBA. But I think what has really benefited, so I work very closely with NIIT University. And what we do is, and I really believe in, you know, cross-phase learning. So if we have children at the university interacting with the children in the school, that actually does it. Because they are the children of the future, they understand what's required. So when we do these projects, we brainstorm with the older ones at the college. And that has really helped. And I think if this is something that Rishihood University is thinking about, if they can be mentors there, even in the first year. Because what we're looking at, these older children who also get this leadership sort of a job to do, to be able to mentor the young ones in the schools. And having said that, because somewhere in the conversation we had children earning while they are at school. So to give you an example, one of the schools in Gurgaon, I won't name it, actually created walking sticks because they were working with a blind school. So they created walking sticks with sensors. And in 11th class, they got somebody to fund it, and they're actually manufacturing that now. So these are instances where I think if somebody in the university, the children at the university can mentor these children. I am trying to find them industry connect as well, because as many schools, when they approach us, you know, we are making this product and can you, you know, get us a mentor in the industry. We're trying to get those at Mahatratva, we're trying to get them as well. But if there's a university and there are children, I actually like that better. If you have a student mentoring a student.
Well, that's absolutely wonderful. And the other thing as well with creative students or design students, like with product design students, the minute they've actually made something and then somebody's interested in commercially, it changes them completely. You've recently tied up with the Finns, with Finland. You did a trip there recently. Most of us know that Finland is pretty evolved when it comes to education. Any feedback from that you could give us?
Yeah, so when we set up Mahatratva about a year and a half back, I took the entire team to Finland. You know, that's the place to see. But what hits you there is there's such less children in the classroom. We have to deal with masses, 50 to 60 children in a class. So we can do brilliant stuff as well, I think, as Indians. We just have too much to deal with. But having said that, entrepreneurship in the Finnish schools starts at the entry level. So there are children who are actually learning about entrepreneurship, maybe in a very mild form, but they do it right at the beginning. And in year 6, they have a whole lot of community spaces. So they book a community space, and the children in year 6 actually go and sell stuff there, whatever they've created. So I actually saw a kid who just had an idea. there was no product, but he wanted to sell that product. And he was sitting there convincing people, communicating, and that was taught to him while he was in school. So I think that's something we want to emulate and stress upon here as well. So we are actually looking at a whole lot of courses where we can talk about entrepreneurship, leadership, that sort of a thing, even at the K-12 level.
So we see that the university system, or the D-school system, has got to do more. We know that there's quite a lot lacking. Lalit, there's been this talk about putting together the Chartered Society of Designers.
You see, the major problem, Mike, is that we have a tendency to define. Look at an ID, for example. They have a tendency to define what design is. The moment you define, that's the end of it. Okay? Design is about life. Can you define life? Design is like love. Can you define love? There are many flavors of it. We have to cultivate those many flavors. We cannot define entrepreneurship. We should not. Entrepreneurship is something, it's an opportunity which has to be explored. You look at the world is changing really fast thanks to creativity. The growth is doubling every 10 years. Okay? In 100 years, you would have as much change or progress development as in 20,000 years. Look at the type of new industries which have come up. Google is there, Facebook is, do they ever advertise? And yet they go on growing. Why is it that these companies are able to grow without any advertising? Because they are latching on to the primordial values that we all want. The values of inclusiveness, of empowerment, of growth, of sharing. And that's how they grow. So creativity has to be really tied with these values, you see. And when I say values, sometimes we get values wrong. You see, all abstract nouns that you have in the dictionaries are values. Okay? So you have nouns, you have verbs, you have adjectives, you have adverbs, and you have abstract nouns. In the category of nouns, you have abstract nouns. All those abstract nouns are values, which are supposed to enhance and direct your thinking, your creativity. So stop defining, start exploring. That's what I say.
Well, that leads me to quite a complicated thing, because there was this talk at NID about setting up a chartered society of designers, because I do think as design educators we need, and as designers we do need we need a body. But do you think then, if by doing that it's going to stifle the creativity?
See, I was very lucky. After my education at IT Kanpur, IT Delhi, I got an opportunity and I was thrown into this Royal College of Art Environment. Okay? And it's a postgraduate environment. So everybody is exploring. They don't define design. Nobody defines design. You go to the best department of mathematics in the world, they're exploring what maths is all about. You go to an applied mechanics department, they are exploring what force is.
That's wonderful.
So that's the direction we have to take the academics, you see.
I agree, totally. Manika is somebody that's in the field, somebody who is in the running a design school every day with all its various nuances. What should be the culture of the design school or the School of Creativity at Rishihood? What do you feel that might be lacking in other places that we need to put in?
I might basically feel that design right now across, if I have to be more precise, is more compartmental. Design's true nature is holistic. It is free-flowing. Let that be. I mean, let's not talk only design, let's talk creativity. It's free-flowing, we can't define it. As what Professor Lalit Das has said, let the students discover, let them explore, let them learn. That should be, which is lacking big time. And let them think, again I will stress, let the students think our education system is not giving them that kind of place, that kind of time where the students are allowed to think. Till the time they don't think, they are not thinking critically. When they are not thinking critically, they are not problem solvers. So these are the few things which are, syncing with the design education, and we really need to work towards it,
It is a massive change of culture. I mean, when you go back, and we say that we're in Renaissance, and you go back to Nalanda and the great those wonderful liberal arts universities, I don't think anybody's been able to replicate that way of thinking. Whether you were an architect or a musician, or whether you were a potter or a painter or a dancer or whatever, you were there. It wasn't this one, architects up there, potters down here. It was knowledge, and knowledge which leads to wisdom. And that's everything. We have it in our DNA. Well, I've got a bit of it. but that's what and that's what we have the opportunity. We have the opportunity to bring it back.
So I'll just interrupt here, if I may, please.
Please do.
Yeah. So, Professor Sir, basically, I need your inputs onto this. That when we are so much pro about our DNA, we heard the first panel talking that it's in the DNA, the Indian value systems, the Indian rich history, the Indian crafts, the Indian handicrafts, whatever. So, Professor, basically, if I go back, and this is coming from our discussion we had in IIT Mumbai, how NID evolved. NID was basically from Bahuas and Ulm. How NIFT evolved, again from FIT, right? How Pearl has come up, again from Nottingham Trent and then Laureate. So when we are talking, and what Mike is rightly saying, and we've heard Dr. Mishra so many times about Nalanda universities and Takshilas, and where these are world-renowned Indian universities, why can't we have that Indian, indigenous Indian curriculum which the world should be proud of?
Well, I think Rishihood should forget about NID and NIFT, everything, okay? Start afresh. And I would personally take inspiration from our cultural heritage. We had a set of core values, and those core values were accepted across the country, okay? And every state, every region is cultivating its own crafts, its own expressions, but the core values remain intact. That is the essence. You are allowing every individual to be creative, expressing things in their own way, but the core values remain intact. And this is what brings about that integration. And this is what I was saying about nature. Every species is a creative whole, but it enhances the larger whole. So there is a core values in the ecosystem which every species subscribes to. There is a concept of wellness. The tiger has a concept of wellness, the deer has a concept of wellness. They may be differing and disparate, but they tie up together into a larger whole, which forms the ecosystem. So keep that in mind.
No, very much in mind, and that's lovely. And this young man beside me who's drawing with his left hand, which is a pretty good sign of creativity. Are you dyslexic?
OCD, but not dyslexic.
Okay. No, but the two great signs of creativity, left-handed and dyslexia. I've got one, but that's the other one. Let's have your wisdom. Come on. Where are we going?
So I'd like to share with you, some challenges we faced in our professional practice over the last 6 years, as we've worked more closely with public health systems, particularly in Bihar state, but other states as well. We, for force of circumstances, have to work with public health practitioners, people often trained in pediatrics, OBGYN, some sort of medical doctor before they begin handling public health systems at scale. So our teams, often constituted of social science researchers and designers, often blended. When they work together with frontline workers and with block and district level officials, often find kind of ready communion and willingness to work together and to make changes at PHC centers, in the way session sites operate, in the way frontline workers are interacting with beneficiaries. And this has been very rewarding, and it's been kind of a significant U-turn in what my organization does. When you work with senior level decision makers, either donors or implementation agencies, basically at the Delhi level, there's a search and a thirst for evidence. Now, I have to say, all my design training and even my anthro training, social science training, we've never been really tasked with generating evidence of a kind that would be dispositive for covering a decision maker's ass for choosing A versus B. And if you've been following, the Silicon Valley debates around how Google thinks about design, right? Google has famously done all of these A/B tests about which color of blue the public really prefers. And they say we can run these tests and we don't really need designers at all, because we can just keep asking the public at large, and the engineers will run algorithms overnight, and in the morning we'll know. So we don't really need anybody from some fancy schmancy place who goes around telling everybody that they have better taste than the average person. So over the last 6 years, unfortunately, my organization has had to become really good at proxy variables, at running RCTs, basically doing A/B tests of various kinds in order to demonstrate that the interventions we provided, like an A&M workstation, a kind of vaccine delivery kit, are actually improving the service delivery, the speed of service delivery, the completeness, the total quality of care, but also increasing intangibles like the credibility or the trust between the frontline worker and the beneficiary community is being enhanced as a result of the artifact. These are the kinds of intuitions that designers often have, other kinds of decision makers also have, but which they're really difficult to actually test and prove, demonstrate. So these scenarios come to my mind because it seems to me that it would be really problematic if a new generation of kids is kind of exposed to certain kinds of validation which might work for them in the period of their undergraduate or graduate education, but then leaves them blindsided to basically the scientific state, which is the one we live in, which asks increasingly for evidence before it makes decisions. And you'd rather want a new cadre of creative thinkers who are also technologically adept, also self-starters and self-learners, who are also don't then balk at the idea that there can and should be rigorous testing, both around kind of the hard claims, as well as then even the interactional claims or the social consequences of the propositions that they've created.
That's excellent. And I'm going to open it up for questions in a sec. I mean, that comes back to Dr. Duss's point about we need far more doctoral studies in design, because the whole thing about evidence, and even I'm by that nowadays. Okay, I think we should, thank you very much, I mean, amazing. I think we should open it up for questions. If we're opening it up for questions, can they please be questions? Yeah? You want to chat to us afterwards, that's something else. I have to ask the boss first, sorry, Professor Misra. Thank you.
Okay, the question I'm going to ask is probably something that has been bothering me, and maybe since all of you are on this panel on education will be able to answer. Is our current education system indoctrinating our students? Not allowing them to imagine, not allowing them to think, not allowing them to dream, not allowing them to explore. And if you believe that this is true, how do we change it?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Everything is so prescriptive. A student, if he thinks out of the box and writes an answer which is far more illuminating than what is prescribed in the text, it just says not in text. full stop. And that is so demoralizing for the student. It alienates the child from the system, from everything, and then ultimately himself. So yes, you are absolutely right. I don't have the answers though.
I think basically, to answer this, number one, as the initial panel said, the student's mindset about the conformity has to be broken. It's a very strong stereotype that every step the student requires to have a confirmation. Creativity requires no confirmation. Secondly, also, if we can look into the assessment criterias, can we just come out of this very good, average, pass, fail? Can we just get rid of these terms? I mean, how, on what parameters do we assess our students really need to be rethink? We really have to rethink on these.
So, if you guys haven't noticed, I guess I'm not in sync with the rest of you guys on this panel. It seems to me that young people haven't ever had it so good, right? I mean, I did a bunch of traveling around about 4 years ago when I was setting up this new fellowship program, and I met, young kids across India at different kinds of schools, mostly engineering schools. And, in those days, I think maybe this is 6 years ago, they introduced me to WhatsApp. I had no idea what WhatsApp was at the time, but they were like, people are instructors are doing their thing in front of us in class, but actually we're all on WhatsApp. And sometimes there's a titter of laughter, and then the instructors really just don't know what's going on. And I was surprised by that, and I heard also at that time from a lot of people that people are just not attending lectures anymore. It's a kind of crisis. We have to force them to attend lectures. And I mean, obviously there's something going on around social media, around access to YouTube videos, TED Talks, how to do this, how to do that. You can teach yourself how to make, a flan or pasta puttanesca on YouTube in a couple of minutes on double time. So the universe of opportunities to learn and to be exposed to global media, you don't have to travel anywhere anymore to talk about Netflix and have an opinion on kind of marquee television anymore. So this kind of arrival of the world into Indian media sphere, into Indian consciousness, is a reality. And that media changes, every couple of years, half a decade. Educational institutions, you'd be lucky if they change over 2 centuries. And so I thought I picked up a bunch of pathologies that is internalized, but I mean, I thought I detected a bunch of pathologies in the way people are thinking about how consciousness is formed, and whether actually formal instruction has the same kind of monopoly over it as it may have had, maybe in Dewey's times or something, in the late 19th century. I think engineering students are probably making the right choices, rational choices for their own future, in that they're credentialing themselves in ways that society validates. And at the same time, they can pick up a bunch of other skills on the side. And if you look at the guys that are, actually running UX, UI for major Indian startups, that's the profile that they have. So, do we have even good evidence that the people who are making products, making digital artifacts, experiences, platforms in India are actually coming out of design strand versus coming out of tech? It's not even close, right? It's a lot easier to teach tech kids something a little bit about UX and how things look better. And unfortunately, for Christ's sakes, I got to do that in my own company, even when kids have a crafts or a design or some other kind of. So I'm yelling at them all the time, Tufti, have you heard of Tufti? And they haven't. In many cases, they have no idea who this guy, Edward Tufti, is, unfortunately, or what the visualization of data and what the intentionality around visualization. So I'm with the other guy on the last panel saying it's not about designers all. It's like a bunch of other people that have decided that they need to visualize in order to be able to communicate, in order to be able to do their job, that are actually advancing the thresholds of how things are done in practice. So my sense of things is that the world is running away, and the institutions, should they even choose to catch up, should be really, really serious about the different modalities in which they intend to participate in the world.
Thank
Thank you very much. I'll take one last, sorry. No, oh, sorry. Can't say no.
You see, if you look at universities of 50 years back, they were built upon prerequisites. And you have to do this course, and do this course, and then do this course. And this goes on for 4 years before you can do a project. So stupid. Fortunately, things have changed, as Aditya mentioning, because now the students are open to what is happening on YouTube and there's TEDx, and there's so much lectures available. There's so much more to see, okay? The modern university should not model itself on the universities of 50 years back. Become more open, okay? More free-flowing. No departments, no walls, no boundaries, and encourage people to go anywhere. What is important is that they express the creativity. They should be able to see the gaps in it and take it forward. And whatever needs to fill those gaps, go and meet the experts. Pick up the knowledge. This is how we have to go.
I'm really sorry we have run out of time. Can we do the questions afterwards? Okay, cool. I have to do Christine. Okay. So, Christine, do we have a mic?
So it's really a quick question, and I think I would like Professor Das to answer it. Where do you see the role in teacher education in this country, or where do you see teacher education going in this country? And if it's too long to answer, now I'll talk to you over lunch. But I think it's a huge key in the issues that we're discussing.
The key is to give them the courage to appreciate something different. The teachers, they lack that courage, you see.
Who's going to give them that courage?
So I don't know.
Well,
We have to give them that courage.
Can I just say that at the Rishihood
we
we
do that, the rest is done.
we have a school of education, so that kind of sort of ties it up. Rajat, last question. I'm sorry, but
so just taking everything that you guys said, just one area and opportunity, and I'd just like you guys to comment on this. Small and medium enterprises are really where a lot of cutting edge work is happening, right? Because large industry, primarily looks to monetize whatever they have. Strangely, I find universities or educational institutions not participating or partnering with them. Small and medium enterprises don't have the bandwidth to be able to do a lot of these experiments. Large universities do, right? And that could be an area where a lot of innovation, a lot of new ideas could emerge. And I think that's something that Rishihood might want to consider.
can I just conclude on this one note? I mean, so Christine's here and some of the people from the Buyers Association of India that represent hundreds of those small SMEs, MSEs, and that's one of our goals. It's great for them, but it's also great for us. It's great for the students, it's great for the country. Thank you very much, team. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Thank you.